Yo, what's going on, everyone? Obviously, we are now living in a post civil rights era, a post liberty era. And although there are lots of people, probably those in Trump's constituency, who would disagree with that, they probably feel like they have more liberty now than ever. My perspective is coming from a human being first. Secondly, as a black male living in America. But now we live in a world where other people's ideas and decisions are commandeering our own ways of making sure that we can survive. This video is essentially to remind people that we live in a world where power is king. And whether you like it or not, whether you believe it's wrong or not, you have to come to this realization that no matter what it is that you want, there are going to be other people with competing interests that A, don't want you to get what you want, and B, don't care what it is that you want. I was listening to John Mearsheimer, the noted political theorist and realist, who gave a speech at, I believe it was Cambridge recently. The video was just uploaded, and he's talking about how if you're coming from the perspective of an American, you want to dominate everyone and everything so that you can maintain your position of power. Because if you don't, someone else is going to have that power.
Look, we live in a world where there's no higher authority. And in a world where there's no higher authority and some other state may come after you, the best way to survive is to be really powerful. As we used to say when I was a little boy on New York City playgrounds, you want to be the biggest and baddest dude on the block. And you want to be the biggest and baddest dude on the block, not because you want to be able to beat up other states or other people. You want to do that because it's the best way to survive in a system where if you get in trouble, there's no higher authority that you can turn to. So, speaking as an American, I want to make sure that the United States is and remains an especially powerful state, because that is the best way to maximize your security. If you become weak in the international system, you fall prey to other states. Just think about the Chinese. Think about the century of national humiliation from the late 1840s to the late 1940s. The Chinese were weak. And when you're weak, the other great powers prey on you. What's the lesson the Chinese take away from this? What's the reason that the Chinese are my kind of people? The Chinese understand full well they're never going to let that happen again. They want to be the dominant power in Asia, and they certainly do not want the United States to be more powerful than China is. But the fact is, I'm an American, and as an American, I want to make sure we are more powerful than China.
I was talking to my mentor, and we kind of came to the same understanding that whether you like it or not, you have to contend with power. Living in this bubble, he was telling me that living in America as a bubble, you're protected and shielded from a lot of the tragedies that happen globally, many of which are a result of America's foreign policy, NATO's foreign policy. You know, if you're white and a part of the dominant class, a part of the dominant power structure, you stand to gain and benefit. If you're not, you're kind of fodder for the cannon. And it's unfortunate that even though so many minorities and black people came out to support Kamala, she still lost in the election. Now, I'm not particularly a Democrat or a Republican or anything. I simply read, I write, and I pay attention to what's going on. And from my perspective, you know, as someone who just wishes that people could get along, I realize that that's a very naive stance. And what is really disconcerting is the fact that people who just want to be peaceful and want to exist or coexist with others are being encouraged just because of the social milieu to do things that probably don't agree with their conscience. You know, there's a lot of critique of capitalism and how it disenfranchises and destroys so many lives, the after effects of capitalism. You know, if you're a country in Africa that needs loans to build up infrastructure, you have to go to European institutions, generally speaking, to borrow money. And if you can't pay that money back, which is more than likely, now these institutions in these foreign countries have a kind of neo-colonialist or post-colonialist stranglehold on the development of your country. And so we witness that in foreign policy, and we also witness that domestically. If you are someone who needs a business loan and you're a minority, particularly a Black person, you have to go to the same people who have historically oppressed your people group in order to survive. And that's obviously a catch-22, a conflict of interest. How is it that you're going to go to the people that have their foot on your neck and ask them for a leg up? No pun intended, they're going to keep their foot on your neck. And so as I make content and videos and I write, it's a realization now what kind of game we're playing. You know, you have the Department of Education, which seems to be under threat, although there are plenty of people who say it's not going to just be a wholesale, full-scale dismantling of it. Certain aspects of it may be transferred to the Department of Treasury or to the Department of Labor. People who are against Trump and the policies that they may implement are worried about police brutality ramping up. There are plenty of people in this country who may have children with citizens, but not be citizens themselves, which means their children, if they were born here, are going to be citizens, but now may risk deportation because of Trump's policies. And there's a whole list of other things. I haven't read the entire 900 or so page document that is Project 2025. We live in a very unstable period. So much of the civil rights legislation that was passed in the 60s by Robert Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, that's under threat now. You know, June 2023, the landmark case that made it to the Supreme Court that overturned or dismantled race-conscious admissions decisions into higher education, our institutions of higher education. Now, Black people in particular have to contend with the fallout from that. Are we going to see even fewer Black people being admitted into institutions? Are we going to see, as in the case of Duke, who just ended scholarships for historically oppressed groups, particularly Black people? They had scholarships that were dedicated to Black people that did not have the resources or income to attend college. They just canceled that program. And we're going to see, I think, a regression back into 1950s and prior type reality. Maybe this is a new era of Jim Crow, where because Republicans they're going to dominate the House, they're pretty likely to dominate the Senate. They have now the presidency, the executive, and then they also have the judicial branch. You know, if Justice Alito and Justice Clarence retire, they're more than likely to be replaced with conservative judges, which would essentially mean we're still going to have that same conservative dominated court, but now you have two judges who are going to have lifetime tenure that are going to be extraordinarily young in comparison to the rest of the court. And so we know we're going to have a body of casework in the future that's going to be decided in favor of conservative ideology, conservative philosophy. So what's to be done? What can we do to combat the upcoming slew of what I would say is anti-liberty legislation, philosophy, and social disposition? As I speak to other people, other Black people, many have professed a kind of fear, if you will. But I think that there's no reason to truly fear. It's time to recognize what we're up against and not take for granted the rights that we have, the struggle that has been initiated, which people have died, fought for, been assassinated over. We have to realize that those gains were made, a lot of them through bloodshed, but also through legal praxis, through political praxis and organization. I think now, it is to some degree a bit scary, because when you look at instances of Black excellence, if you will, even though that term has been commandeered and used to reflect a more neoliberal ideology, I think that when we talk about Black people doing for self, as they did in Tulsa, as they did in places in Florida, as they did in Texas, and a lot of these towns and communities where Black people were thriving were just destroyed by whites that were angry. I think that is a fear that Black people do have, is that we build and then they destroy. We build and then they destroy. How do you survive that? Where is the motivation to continue when you think that your people and everything that you've worked for is going to be destroyed? It's very troubling, but at the same time, there are always opportunities, because we can't just lay down and die. I think today's Black man or Black woman is very sure that that's not the thing that we need to be doing, and none of us are going to lay down and become slaves again. So I think we would all rather take bullets and die than be someone else's slave. So, and I think white people understand that. And again, this isn't a generalization that all white people are evil or that all Black people are worried and afraid and fearful. But we have to understand that white people do benefit from the evils that their forefathers have promoted and have legislated into law, into our everyday lives. There is white privilege, and there are plenty of white scholars that will tell you there is white privilege. And Black people have to understand that we are in a kind of unique position, because it makes you wonder, is the goal for Black people to get into positions of power like white people so that they can do the same thing and help support a country whose foreign policy is to dominate the rest of the world? I mean, are Black people winning if we become presidents and politicians and, help contribute to the same type of belligerence and oppression that this country has levied on other groups of people? I don't think so. I think when I talk to my friends, the average Black person is just trying to survive. We want to live a good life, but we don't always realize what the cost is for living that good life. My mentor has said to me, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. You have to establish yourself, and you have to create a baseline, a foundation for you to live. I don't have the solution or, the answers, just like None of us individually do. I think we're collectively trying to figure this thing out. But I do feel like unity is always the answer. And in such a divided country like ours, it seems that unity now it's further from being realized. The crazy thing is that everyone who voted in this last election, they're all Americans. What does the word American mean? And maybe that's the whole point of this video. So what is it that we mean by American? You know, how and why are we so divided? I spoke to a very racist guy the other day that I used to work with. I don't think he understands how racist he is, but he's extraordinarily racist. Older white gentleman. And he was like, just saying the worst stuff. Get all the immigrants out. No sympathy. Let's get Trump back in here. This is a white man's land. Even if something happens to Trump, he believes that JD Vance is a smart guy who's going to be able to lead the country. I'm just like, where do these people get these ideas from? But, you know, his father was extraordinarily racist as well, and they grew up in the South, so it's this Jim Crow era. You know, he just has this idea that Black people don't belong here. It's like the weird thing, the weird elephant in the room. You have to know that it's unfortunate, but the history of oppression in this country, it's raw. You know, LBJ was very racist, even though he signed the civil rights legislation. He was exceptionally racist. Was not above calling Black people nigger to their face. Was not above just the most egregious outbursts of hatred and bigotry. So Malcolm X had the saying that the white liberal is not your friend. They'll give you the poison and then arrest you for it after you take it, kind of thing. So I think that as we move forward and we are deciding how we want to live our lives, I think the number one principle is to ask yourself how you identify. You know, you live in this country. If you're a citizen, you are indeed an American, and you should have access to the things that you need to survive. No one should be taking those things from you. However, this is the reality that we live in. I would ask people to keep communicating, keep educating yourself, keep standing up when you have the chance. You know, making content like this seems like it won't do too much, and we don't really know. What we can say for sure is media it's the playing field that has to be dominated. You have to have a stake in the game. And the only way to do that is to make content that tries to get people to understand your point of view. You know, people like Nick-fuentes and Ben Shapiro, and even to some degree the Jordan Petersons, and like these are white supremacists who are sometimes very overt in their beliefs and their ideology, and then you have others who are a little more subtle with it. Umar Johnson points out the difference between race and bigotry.
Bigotry is when you hate somebody for who they are. Racism means I just want to control the resources.
People who are bigots have an emotional connection to their feelings of disgust and hatred for the other, whereas racists actually have the power to enact those feelings of bigotry through law, whether it be de jure or de facto. We need to come to an understanding of where we are right now. Those that have political inroads with those in power, we need to be lobbying those individuals to make changes that benefit more of society, but don't put your hope in that exclusively. See what you can do on a regular basis to ensure that your own people have power and resources and economic outlets to build a base that you can stand on. Because without that, you're going to see much more territory taken from you. And then it gets to a point where there's almost no recourse to fight back, to combat what, for Black people, our ancestors have fought so hard to have in this country. And Black people in this country are very unique because although our ancestral roots are in Africa, we don't have that deep connection to our homeland. And many Black people here will say, I'm not African. I may have roots there, but I'm American. And I can't all the way say that they're wrong, because if this is all you know, then this is all you know. But you have to also understand too that Chinese people, Japanese people, Vietnamese people, people from South America, people from Eastern Europe that are here, they have a place to go back to. They have homelands where their people are sovereign. However, in Africa, even though there were a lot of independent struggles that occurred throughout the 60s and 70s and even 80s and 90s, what we see as independence is still a dependency on colonial powers. And it's unfortunate. The next 50 years or so are going to be very pivotal, very crucial for African nations. I am in support of a unified Africa, because if everyone else, if all the other countries can group themselves together, will first establish independence and operate independently, but then group themselves together, as in the case of maybe like NATO, and erect some kind of unified power and authority. Why can't Africa do that? So I am for that. And I think that as African people here, descendants of those who came from Africa, I think that we have to develop a consciousness, a group consciousness, not based in racism and hatred of the other, but based in power. Because that's one thing that power respects. Power respects power. Doesn't mean that I won't challenge power, but power respects power, right? And it treads lightly around other people that are very powerful. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt who said, walk softly, but carry a big stick. Well, I think that that's where we are right now. More to come. These are just some of my thoughts based on the recent elections. Everyone out there, be well. Take some of my thoughts to heart and see what you can do to help make this a more egalitarian, more free, more unified existence for all of us on the planet. Thanks. Peace.